Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining this learning experience brought to you by Mend. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. Before we dive into things today, I have just a couple of notes to review. First of all, we are recording our session today. So if you miss any of our conversation, if you'd like to watch again later, or if you'd like to share this with the rest of your team, we are going to be sending you the recording via email shortly after we conclude this live session today. Now, if you'd like to be involved, there are a couple of ways to do so. Your first option is to use the chat tab on the right side of your screen. And when you do find that chat tab, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you're joining from today. If you have any questions for us, we do want you to submit those to the Q&A tab on the right side of that chat section. Sending your questions to the Q&A just helps us make sure that we are able to address them and keep track of them throughout our program. So once again, please do send those to the Q&A section. If you jump over to where it says handouts, you'll see there are a bunch of resources there for you. So feel free to grab those while you're with us today. And of course, we will be selecting 2 of our most engaged attendees to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So thank you in advance for all of your chats, your questions, and your post-webinar surveys. Those will all qualify you for our giveaway. So our topic today is securing the future, a shift from reactive to proactive application security. I'm joined today by Chris Lindsey, application security evangelist at Mend.io. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. I know we've got a lot of great material to cover, so I'm going to let you just dive right in.
That sounds great. Thank you, Cody. Hi, guys. My name is Chris Lindsey. Let me give you a quick background so you guys have a good understanding where I'm coming from. I wrote software professionally for over 30 years. The last 5 years, I ran a security program for a very large enterprise, built it from the ground up. It was 700 plus developers. It was amazing. I went from there to Mend, who is a vendor that I brought in, and ran their professional services side for a year and a half. And now I am their security evangelist, where I am going out and speaking about what makes good application security, best practices, things that will help you be successful. And so as we go through this today, I am going to talk about some developer side, some security side, and we're going to talk about why things are reactive and how to make things proactive. Things that worked for both me and my program and others as I've talked to customers over the last year and a half. And again, 30 plus years that experience that I'm pulling from the developer side. So no question is off limits. Ask away as we go. We'll hit Q&A at the end, and then we'll kind of go from there. So let's get kick off. So a misconception, right? Developers cost too much money to spend time manually updating dependencies, said no one ever who has been compromised. In 2023, 71% of the enterprises admitted their AppSec programs were reactive, playing catch up with vulnerability alerts. Prior to 2023, the number was a little bit higher. So some enterprises are catching up. Others don't even know where to start. So what does this mean to be in reactive mode? Well, did you find a vulnerability in an app, then a few weeks later or months found it in a different app? I mean, just because you have SQL injection in one app doesn't mean that you don't have it in another, or dependencies. I mean, there's so much more. Do you see a known issue on the news and had to start researching it? Are you impacted? They're crazy enough. I was at Developer Week last week, and some people are still talking about Log4j and needing to remediate. That was quite a long time ago, and they're still trying to wrap up the remediation on Log4j. Did you find an issue in production? Did you do pen testing? Did you have something happen? Did you have an end user reach out to your security team and said, hey, I found something within your system. How do I tell you about our findings? That happens, and it happens frequently. So what a reactive state looks like, 71% is not a good number. So context makes it even worse when you start considering the following. Nearly 70% of organizations have directly encountered at least one serious security incident from a software vulnerability over the last 12 months. The reality is that in itself is actually low, because there are several companies that have had more than one, two, three, four, five on up. Data breaches, 78% increase from 2022. They're only getting worse. And think about, where does your data breaches come from? Is it coming from an API? Is it coming from your screens, your front ends? How it's coded, how it's been designed. I mean, it's data breaches are on the way up. Attacks have made application security a board level priority for at least 85% of companies. When you're not breached, the checkbook is tight. And when you have a good program, you don't ever hear about, hey, what's going on, because things are nice and quiet. You're kicking the can down the road. It's not a question of if, but when. And, with a good program, that when is going to be really, hopefully, far down the road. Still doesn't mean that you're not going to get breached, but it means you're kicking it down the road. Whereas when you're not making security a priority, really, it's going to happen a lot sooner. So there are two types of development teams. So let's talk about how we got here and get some more information on it. So there's two types of development teams that are out there. Those who know security, so developers who know and understand security. A good program has a security champion program. They use secure coding practices. They know their security profile. They have threat modeling, application exposure. They understand, the application security will, which we'll actually talk about here shortly. And then we're going to focus on those who do not. I was at a convention once, and I had a guy come up and ask who Mid was, and I explained. He said, "Well, I write clean code. Doesn't that count?" And then I proceeded to use a penetration testing tool and show him that even though with clean code, he's still susceptible to even some basic stuff. So education is your friend. Make sure that you have an education program for developers, and we'll get more into the stuff later. So let's discuss the bad state, because that's why we're here. We're going to talk about the reactive and then how to become proactive and get there. So again, 50%, 52% of the companies say they can effectively remediate a critical vulnerability. This is a very bad number. What does it mean that only 52% can effectively remediate? That's not good by any stretch. By kicking the tech debt down the road, it can create the perfect storm. And that's what happens when an emergency comes up and you have to make big changes. This can impact your response time. It can mean the difference between a 15-minute fix and an entire day. And so again, what does it mean by only 52% can effectively remediate, which means 48% can't? 44% of practitioners agree with that statement. That's constantly putting out application security fires. So you're going from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And when you think about this, having a wicker basket, and you're pouring water into the wicker basket, and the water is your effort, and the wicker basket is finally being secure. You're just pouring water in and it's just leaking out. And that's the problem. You're putting out the application security fires, but you're not fixing the root problem. And your tech debt incurs interest. The bill will come due at some point. And what I mean by that is, from the development standpoint, you cut corners, you got to get things out the door, you got to make quick turnarounds, you've got a lot of things on your plate. And people are just like, look, I've got to get the release out the door. I have deadlines, timeframes, I have QA, I got to get it there. And people will cut corners not only in the development, but there'll also be dependencies. Hey, I grabbed a dependency, I found it, I put it in, it works. Why would I ever go back and worry about it? And so when you do not have a proper security program put together, you may have no idea what's going on. And so you're kicking that tech debt down the road, and it's incurring interest. So reactive state, right? So let's talk about development teams. What leads an AppSec program to be stuck in reactive? So you're focused on hitting deadlines. You're getting the job done. You're going sprint to sprint, release to release, but you're putting minimal thought on security or on your dependency choice, right? You're grabbing a dependency, grab and go. Hey, I need the ability to do logging. Let's go find the log thing. Oh, look, Log4j. It works great. It's a Java app, .NET, whatever, language of your choice. But you're going to go grab something out there. You're going to plug it in. You're going to get it working, and it's going to get through QA. And you go on, right? You're not thinking about what's out there. And so what's happening is you're putting yourself in tech debt. You're making yourself reactive because now all of a sudden when something comes up, boom. So you're neglecting your dependency updates, right? 89% of code bases contain at least an open source code more than 4 years out of date. We talked about this. We found the information out there. To be honest with you, I was at Developer Week again last week, and I asked around how many of, if you know me, it makes sense, but I went up to some of the different companies, and we we're just kind of talking security in general. It was a little bit of a lull, and I said, look, let's talk about your dependencies that are out there. How many of you guys actually have all your dependencies updated? One out of the many said, hey, everything's updated. We have a tool in place that we use, and it works great. Everybody else, we have outdated. So I mean, it's a big problem out there. You have alert fatigue, right? Too many emails, alerts from too many places. Your developers are getting log alerts from their own system, log alerts from the security team, log alerts from just everywhere, right? So you have alert fatigue. I can tell you, 30 years of running security or development, what happens? You have an inbox, right? You have an auto forward rule. You take the information, it comes in, you just send it off to there. Your idea is like, man, I'll be right here. I'll stay on top. I'll segment off these and I'll stay on top. Next thing you know, you're 200 emails behind, 2,000 emails behind. And then you get to the certain point where you just highlight them all and you say delete because they're so far out of date. Who knows, right? And when the security team does call you about a security issue, it's very possible that they'll ignore you because switching from one development branch to another takes time. It's not super quick. And so, some of the security teams are playing reactive, right? That they're looking at results and they're like, I've got this high finding, this high vulnerability finding. I need to talk to them. And the problem is the developers are just, getting plagued from just people reaching out. And, we'll talk about ways that you can fix that relationship, ways that you can fix it to a point that makes sense. So we're getting there, right? And then not to mention the amount of time that you're spending going through QA. Think about it this way. When things are being developed, you have to develop, you code it, you get going, you get it through QA, it gets out the door. So now all of a sudden, when you're reactive, you don't want to bother QA because if QA does their reactive version, they're just taking what you're sending and getting it out the door. They're not even thinking about security, which is a problem. All right, let's talk about the security team side of being reactive, right? So you got fragmented data, functionality, and processes. So you have 65% fragmented security infrastructure that impedes responsive, right? So you're manually integrating tools in pipelines. You're not automating things. You're simply going in. And I mean, we have customers that have over 500,000 repositories. Yes, that's true. And if you're manually doing it, you'll never, ever hit 100%. Your coverage, your ability to reach 100% coverage of critical apps, reactive, you don't have the visibility into what matters. You don't have the ability to say this vulnerability is more critical than this vulnerability. It's hard to prioritize when you don't have the entire picture, right? And so vulnerability or, your fragmented infrastructure, it's a very common problem out there, and there's options to fix it that are common. We'll discuss more shortly, right? So reaching 100% coverage is a dream for most companies. Most are far, far, far away from that number. Some companies barely can reach 20%, and they feel good about it. And feeling good about 20%. What about 80%, right? What about that 80% that's not covered? So let's not stop there. Let's include how developers perceive security teams. So developers, they get vulnerability alerts, and it's just an unplanned alert. Again, this is being reactive, right? I don't have the time to address. Hot fixes are worse because now you're having to put a release on hold, And then you're spending a lot of time changing your whole environment over so that you could actually do the coding, so that you can then fix it in a previous release. And what if your software has multiple versions out there that have this vulnerability that have to be backup, updated from a certain point? Let's say that you're a company that writes software that has 10 versions out there, and you have 10 different customers with 10 specific versions for each one. You've got to modify that same fix 10 times. And, and receiving alerts from a development standpoint is an unwelcome interruption. And developers are always feeling like they're behind anyway on the release alone. And so alerts are a distraction. And that's definitely how they feel. So 88% of CISOs say developers aren't remediating critical vulnerabilities due to alert fatigue. I think that number could actually be higher, but definitely from our reports, 88%. 89% of code bases contained at least open source that was more than 4 years out of date. And that's talking a code, that's out of date, but how many versions of the same dependency do you have? Think about the old jQuery stuff, the old 1.x, depending on how you wrote your system. You may have 4, 5, 6 different versions of jQuery because the newer pages were used with newer jQuery. But some of the older pages using jQuery, again, it's one of those things where you can't just take the latest version and plop it in because it's incompatible. And so now all of a sudden you find yourself running multiple versions of dependencies. And what happens when something comes up with those multiple dependencies that says, hey, guess what? All of 1.x has this issue. So you're going to need to at least go to 3.x or 4.x. That becomes very problematic. So what do we do? Let's get off the compliance hamster wheel and start managing the app risk and posture. Let's talk about, all right, we've been talking about reactive. How do we start switching that over to being proactive? And there's different technologies that will get us there. So let's talk about that. These are just 5 options, and there's actually more, but these are some of the key ones that you really should be focused on starting, right? So do you know what each of these are? Do you know what value each of these brings to you? What SCA does? SAST, Container API, DAST? Any idea what these do? And how many of these do you actually have implemented in your environment? Are they implemented correctly? And just because you have AWS and you click the enable WAF button, Web Application Firewall, does not mean you have a WAF. It is a checkbox, and that's where it ends. And so with tools, you have to configure them properly for success. Some tools are a lot easier than others. I mean, take DAST, for example. DAST needs to know your sitemap. And as long as it has your whole sitemap, has the ability to do authentication and non-authenticated scans, now you're getting a view from, hey, if I'm trying to hack it from the outside versus, hey, I'm logged in and what kind of things can I do? Containers. Let's start thinking about all the different things that are out there today. Start looking at, hey, am I running Docker or Kubernetes? Am I in AWS, Google, Azure Cloud? What kind of containerization am I doing? Do you know what's lurking in those images? Do you know where you're pulling your images from? There's so much information out there related to containers. Sometimes it can be mind-boggling, right? And think about this. Are you pulling your container down from the site every time that you're going to build it, or are you pulling it from internal? Because if you're pulling it from external, what happens if it gets compromised? Normally, a good practice here is you're actually running the container from a local instance. So you bring down the container, you do a scan, you deem it safe, you're happy with it. Now you put it over into an environment that your whole build system can pull from. Now you're pulling a clean container. Now, that doesn't mean that a vulnerability could be identified in the future, which happens. I mean, because containers are open source. A lot of them are, because you're dealing with Linux and different tools that are in there. And so, something that might be clean and good today may not be tomorrow. And so again, having container security, so that way when it does happen, you know it, and you can deal with it, that's important. But there's always updates going on. If a container gets out and it's been compromised within usually a half an hour to a couple hours, it's been identified, hey, this container has been compromised. A good version's out there, and then you can run with it. So my recommendation, when you pull a container down, let it sit for a week or two and do your scans and make sure that it's good and clean, because if it's compromised, you're going to know from the site where you pulled it from, have a checkbox. Hey, after a week or two, let's go make sure that the same version's out there. And if a newer version's out there, why did a new version get out there? Is it a new feature, or are they fixing the security standpoint? SCA, when you start looking at SCA, SCA is looking at your dependencies, and a lot of programs really don't put a lot of focus on dependency management. Again, a lot of the history is, hey, if it's good, it's working, why would I go fix it? And the problem with dependencies is you have both direct and indirect dependencies. You may have tools that are using third-party or open source components in them, and you're tied to the top version, your direct dependency. And what happens when your indirect dependency has a vulnerability that could impact you? So again, it's having this information is absolutely key for success. And SCA is one of those things. When I ran my security program, it was one of the last things that I added. But once I added it and I did my proof of concept, it opened my eyes to a whole slew of problems that I had within my environment. And we got those fixed. And the crazy part about dependencies and SCA is a lot of your tools out there for penetration testing, like not to name names, but Burp Suite's a great one. OAuth Zap is another great one. They'll tell you what dependencies are being used on a page and what vulnerabilities are associated with those. So, the hackers out there already know this information. You probably should too. And that's just an area that, it's growing more and more. Knowledge, has been increasing because of it. SAST, people talk about the SAST findings and why, oh my gosh, I have all these, they consider them false positives. No, it just depends, right? Think about code injection or code execution security vulnerability. The problem is if I have a command execution issue on a console application, does it matter? Because I'm logged into the command prompt. I'm right there on the OS level. Doesn't matter at that point, right? Because I'm already a command line, I have access to it. But what does matter is when I have a web page that has a command injection issue or command execution issue on the back end, and now all of a sudden I can craft commands and requests that are being executed on your internal web server. And when you're crafting the things, you can craft them in ways that your WAF can't catch, your firewalls aren't going to be able to catch, or other things. And that's why having these tools are important, because having that visibility of I can craft stuff all day long through penetration testing tools that will make it all the way through to the back server because they look legitimate. And you're not like API security. I was at Developer Week, and there was a product that was being touted as one that can identify when you haven't configured properly your multi-tenant. A multi-tenant is where you have multiple people hitting it from the same endpoint from multiple companies or multiple users. Think about your bank. If I were to log in as myself, I shouldn't be able to see your data, and you shouldn't be able to see mine. And so APIs, people are touting there's tools out there that guarantee that you're not going to be able to pull other people's data. Well, from development in my years and years and years of writing APIs, unless you've gone in and actually identified, hey, this is the user who's in, here's the data that they have access to, and we're not even talking role-based ability yet. I mean, we're just talking, I hit the endpoint, I get through my validation, I have my token, everything's great, I get in, I can do whatever I want. And if you don't have logic in there that says, hey, this data that's being pulled is not tied to you, it's going to give it to you. And no tool is going to be able to know that except for you. And so, but API security is absolutely important, because being able to test that, the API security automation tools and things out there will try to validate those for you and give you that visibility. They can't block it, but they will notify you of the problem. And so again, that's just something that you should be aware of. Don't fall for the we're going to block everything out there that's bad and evil. There's a lot of it that you can't, but being notified and being aware of the problems, like APIs, they're prone to SQL injection, just like a web page. A lot of people don't think about it. And so, I posted on LinkedIn today, API security is not needed. Well, it really is. Prove me wrong. And the reality is, if you're coding your APIs correctly, your development teams are coding them correctly, and they're validating every bit of information that's coming in, and they've taken the role-based access into account. They're also taking into account the data that's being pulled. Is it theirs or not? And ensuring that it is. I can easily argue that API security, drops down in risk. But again, think about API security. Your mobile applications are, your mobile phones are talking to APIs all day long. That's how they get their information. Web pages, B2B, B2Cs. I mean, you've got so much. So again, this is these are 5 different technologies that are absolutely important. And just in case you're reading it online, and again, I had a conversation actually yesterday about DAST. DAST is not dead. As much as people say it is, the problem with DAST is it's misunderstood. DAST will go out and automate the ability to attack your website. It automates it almost like a penetration testing. If you look at it in that viewpoint, it's helpful. And when it finds things like cross-site scripting issues or SQL injections or the multitude of things that it can find, the problem that other people were telling me is, I don't have code to go to it. I don't know where to go find the problem or fix the problem. Well, your developers do. And there's no excuse. I can give you the request and response data. And with that information, I can identify, hey, here's the entry point. Here's how they got there. Walk the source code. You can find it. And if it's some of the basic stuff, probably correlates, not automatically, but with other findings that your other tools will have. And so with that being said, these are 5 different, key technologies to consider. I sat here for a little bit because each one brings so much value. And these are probably, in my book, the 5 that I would start with. And if I had to start with a single one today, if I were starting a new program today, I would absolutely start with SCA first, because it's the easiest low-hanging fruit one to take care of, and also has the ability to create a lot of problems. I'm going to talk about dependencies more in the conversation today. I would follow that up with SAST and then some of the others. So what does proactive look like for developers, right? So you're automating the dependency updates. So teams that are consistently updating their versions within 48 hours of publication can actually reduce their vulnerabilities by 83%. So question, if you have a dependency out there, you're running an old version of some open source tool, and a vulnerability is detected, what is the fix? Updating. So if you're going to update to get out of the problem, why not just be proactive and just start updating to the latest? And there's some amazing tools out there that have amazing information that will help you through that upgrade journey, so that way you're able to be successful and very painless. It doesn't matter what you do, because anytime you update anything, you still need to go through QA. So as you're updating, the next release, the next version, update those dependencies. Make sure to put them in a third-party folder. Put some notes in there. Hey, this dependency, in your release notes or some kind of developer area. Hey, this dependency is used here, here, and here within the application. That way, when you update something, your QA is going to know, hey, I need to go test these. If they have full regression, even better. Your spotlight experience, right? Being able to quickly narrow down what matters most. Make sure that the critical impacting vulnerabilities are quickly identified and mitigated, right? So making sure that you have the ability to identify what's important and accessible. So I'm going to break these down a little further. We do have a tool, Renovate. It's free. You can go grab it, download it. It's been downloaded 1.3 billion times. Min Renovate is among the top 1% of repositories on GitHub. By all means, go take a look and grab it. The one company, when I was at Developer Week, I asked them, I said, what tool are you using to stay current? Because that one said they were all current. They were actually using Renovate. And so that just kind of warm spot right here. So, and just not necessarily Renovate, but having a good tool, right? And so I'm going to talk about these as a good tool, not just Renovate, but having a good tool. It will scan your repositories to detect dependencies and check for updates. So when you're committing code at any level in your source code management, GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, wherever, right? Multiple out there, multiple systems out there, your Azures, TFSs. I mean, well, not TFS, but but your main ones, right? Scanning your repos to detect the dependencies that are outdated and giving you the updates, right? Having a tool that will submit automatic pull requests, so that way your developers they can come in and look at reports, but when they come in, they're like, oh, look, I have a pull request. They look at the pull request. Oh, there's a dependency update. What's the information on it? A good tool will create a pull request and give you the detail what's in the pull request. That's very positive when you're in a position where you log in, you can see the information, the developers in their environment. They're not having to go to other tools to find it. It's all right in their environment, right? You have merge confidence, scores and alerts on problematic updates. Hey, if I take this update, am I going to have problems? Am I going to have to make coding changes? There are tools out there, Renovate one, that gives you the, hey, it's high confidence or a definitely high confidence that you can take it and not have any problems. Or it's a low confidence. Yeah, you can take it, but now you're going to have coding. With the low confidence, you can schedule those into your releases. With the high confidence, guess what? You can take it, let QA know, and move forward. And automatically group and merge your high confidence updates together. So hey, here's my low hanging fruit. Let's grab it and go on. And make sure whatever tool you're using supports private packages. So a lot of them don't. A lot of them are just out on one repository. But what if you have a repo on site that or a private area like a private artifactory of some type? You need to be able to have that information. A good tool will take care of that. Right. So let's talk about spotlighting experience. Right. So make sure that your tools that are being used where developers use them. Make sure they're showing up in the source code management areas like your GitHubs, your Bitbuckets, GitLabs, on and on. Having a repo-centric approach, again, puts the developers where they work the most. A lot of people talk about tool sprawl. The reality is I'm a big believer and proponent of having the right tool to do the right job. You wouldn't take a screwdriver and try to use it as a hammer. Some people do, they try. But the reality is you need a hammer for a hammer and a screwdriver for a screwdriver. Use the right tool for the right approach. Being repo-centric puts the environment in where the developers are used to it. And you're not, giving them 50 different places, but you're bringing it together. Something that notifies alerts on commits, right? You want commits at all levels. You want commit details all the way down on the developer branch, right? You have your main branch or your production. You have possibly release, hotfix, your dev, integration where you're making sure that devs are doing their things. And then you have features. I have these 5 features I'm adding in as I go through and I create these feature branches. I need to know right there and then, did I create a problem at the feature branch? That's shifting left. We'll talk about pipeline stuff later. But the reality is having that information is absolutely critical. At all levels. And what's in production? You could have fixed it, but something could have sneaked in, or maybe somebody made a change right there in production. It happens. For companies that say they don't develop in production, it's going to be hard to find one that hasn't at least once or twice in the past. And if you have a critical hotfix that needs to happen right now, and it's just 3 or 4 characters that need to be fixed, sometimes people shortcut. Again, tech debt. They fix it and then it shows up later because they didn't push it down the line. Showing something that prioritizes your vulnerabilities, making sure that you know what do I need to work on in what order, right? And give me good remediation suggestions. Even first asked, right? Hey, I have SQL injection. Here's a prepared statement. Here's how to convert it. Here's how to deal with it. That's absolutely important, right? So let's talk about the developer results from all this. Developers now have a better focus on the features and not the security fixes. So they're focused on getting the stuff done. And when security things pop up, they can address it quickly. Developers are not afraid to have a conversation with the security team. When you have a good relationship between your security and your development team, you're going to find that developers will start reaching out to the security team with questions. It happened all the time for me. Hey, I'm writing a mobile phone app, and is a thumbprint good enough for unlocking, the application? Can I tie into the thumbprint sensor and use that to lock and unlock my application? Those are good questions. Developers, if you have a good relationship, will ask you. Otherwise, they're just going to do their own thing, and you're going to find out later. Technical debt's going to be lower as a result of good dependency hygiene. If they're staying on top of their dependencies and they're staying on top of things, other problems that they have, they're going to start staying on top of as well. And so every time you release code going through QA, well, hey, I have this little thing I might want to fix too along with it. That way I'm not just pushing dependencies. And you get that. And then your 0-day vulnerabilities can be addressed much quicker and less worry about breaking the build. What happens when you go from version 2 to version 11? What changes? What am I going to break? When you're going that big, it's a big concern. It adds a lot of stress on developers, stress on QA, because there could be a lot of changes between version 2 and version 11. But if you're going version 2 to version 3, and then the version 4 and 5 and so on, now you're not doing big leaps. And now you feel a little more comfortable about taking that update versus the big swings. Let's talk about it from the security side, right? So having a unified view of all your vulnerabilities and being able to quickly identify the most important security issues that need to be addressed is absolutely critical. So having that full visibility is great. That control, being able to bring on new repositories, new acquisitions. Can I onboard a new acquisition in weeks and months or hours? I was down to 4 hours to bring on an acquisition on my program. With the automation and everything I did, I could turn it on within 4 hours. Now it's going to take time to scan, but I could hit near 100% coverage within 4 hours of enabling it, and then they scans. So being able to quickly onboard your applications and repositories is imperative. So having that visibility to what matters and ability to onboard quickly. So again, your control and visibility, your holistic view, centralized scan configuration. I have one place to go, and I can go hit 20,000 repositories by one configuration. And you think about what's important, right? Put your highest thing. If I'm scanning and creating issues, I want to set the highest point, right? I care about highs and criticals. I don't care about mediums. So what I might do across the board is I might set my scan configuration that affects everything to highs and criticals. And then if I have a team that's doing really well, override down at their level and be able to say, hey, mediums are now important to this team. So having that ability to have a centralized scan configuration is key for your onboarding. And then the ability to override is important. Prioritization, think about CVSS 4. It's come out now. Companies are implementing it with CVSS 4. It gives you the ability to have that visibility into more of your environment. And you want something that's easily integrated with a third party, right? So I have third-party tools, Grafana or other things that can bring the data from my system together so to give me better visibility. Your flexibility and scalability, having something that has the architecture with no limits, right? There's a lot of stuff out there that have limits of, you start hitting 5, 10,000, projects, it starts getting chunky, some quicker, some less. Right. So having something, make sure that whatever you're doing or building has the ability to have an architecture that's going to work for you. It's one thing to be able to say, yeah, we can do X, Y, and Z in the repository. Great. What if you need to scan on-prem? being able to scale on-prem is for some companies is absolutely key. And you may be scaling thousands and thousands of projects a day. So being able to scale for whatever your size is important, whatever tool. Again, global configuration, right? Make sure that you have something that you can globally config to make it easy. And again, make sure that you have something that will give you on-prem scanning just in case you need it, right? So what does this look like, right? So now the developers are communicating with you guys for advice. The security team, knows what the current risk status is of your enterprise or even small company, right? Knowing what your risks are. When I ran my program, all the way up to the CEO, they were aware of all of our findings, and we're a very, very large enterprise. Management knows the current security metrics. How are we doing? And we were knocking down for some of the smaller ones. The goal was 20% of vulnerabilities quarter over quarter. You're going to introduce new vulnerabilities. It's not a static number. It's going to fluctuate. As vulnerabilities come out on dependencies, that will increase it. As you're working on static code analysis, SAST or DAST, you're going to create new stuff. If you're writing code, you're going to create problems, and having that ability to know that and work towards a zero is absolutely critical, right? Vulnerabilities that are already known. So now you can put some remediation in place. You may not be able to easily remediate something, but what you might be able to do is you might be able to put some kind of mitigating factor, like a web application firewall in place. And your zero time to remediate is quicker. Your 0-day vulnerabilities can be addressed much quicker because now you can say, hey, this is how I need to mitigate it. And you could just say, hey, we can mitigate it externally and eventually fix it on the dev side. Or, hey, guess what? This needs to be a dev fix. And it makes it a little bit quicker. I'm kind of starting a little short in time, so I'll go a little bit quicker, right? So updating dependencies is like going to the dentist. If you only do it every few years, it's going to hurt. Again, when you have big jumps in releases, it's gonna really, really hurt. Developer experience, I'm gonna hit real quick on some of these, right? So keeping the results in the repository, right? Build and put your results where the developers live. They're familiar with the repo, right? Have tools that put them in the repo so that they can see it. They don't have to go to any third-party tools, logins, or anything. It's all right where they're accustomed to being, right? Making developers leave their natural habitat is kind of hard for them, right? Now I have 5 or 6 websites to go to, and I need to focus on what's being done, and just it's problematic, right? So do what developers do, right? Keep them in their habitat. Developers are better focused at getting their job done. They're more proactive or productive, and they're happier. Holistic view. When security looks like a puzzle, it's hard to get the big picture without having to assemble it. So, you have tools. Think about an ASPM, tool that you can aggregate all your security tools into one common location for the security team. Now you have a better, picture of what's going on, right? All information in one place. That's where real decisions are made. If you're, making a decision on partial information, it's just a partial solution. Prove me wrong. If you don't have all the facts, now sometimes you don't have all the facts, and you still have to make those decisions. But when you have more facts and all the information together, now you're aligning for success, right? So arm your security team for success. What does that look like, right? So having the right tools that do the right job is easy. Having the wrong tool causes a lot of pain. Having tools that give you actionable results are critical. And give the developers what they need to ensure that security has a chance of success. So, having the security tools, sharing the information with them. Look at a security champion program where you have a security guy that's embedded in your development areas. Make sure you have a developer who's actually on your security team. So when you have that critical find and you're going to go down to the security team and say, hey, you have to fix this right now, you can give the why. You're not crying wolf. You're giving actionable information. It's absolutely imperative to get it right. So, what does that look like, right? So your percentage of developers using AppSec is going to increase. The real time, and this isn't just meant. Really, it's just a before after. but having the application visibility increases, right? Going from 10% to 95. Mean time to remediation, right? Going from, critical and high vulnerabilities, fixing 271 days down to 71, and I'd even say less. Application deployment stoppages per month are far less. So now you're not jumping from fire to fire. You kind of have a better control over what's going on. Days required to identify locations of exposures go from 10 days because you got to go searching through all your applications down to, I just pulled a report. I actually know in 15 minutes every location log4j exists. Days to remediate go down because you're staying current. Your developer count doesn't change because you're not going to remove developers unless you have guys that are specific to security. Then make those champions and make them better. Your time to remediate is less because you know the touch points. Your remediations per month go down. The man hours that track the problems, and honestly, 40 is probably low. When I ran my program, I could tell you we had teams that took a lot more. And I'll be honest with you, working with other customers, Log4j, still people are finding Log4j that they didn't realize, right? So the time spent on actually working and not chasing down dependencies, priceless. Guys, I gave you a lot of information in a very, very, very quick amount of time. I could probably still go for another hour or two. Actually, I'm following this here in about 10 minutes. I'm going over to Developer Week and doing their virtual conversation similar to this. But I hope this was very productive. I haven't seen the chats yet, so we'll take a look here in a minute. We'll do some quick Q&As, and then I'm going to have to hop. Anything that's out there, we'll take a look at. We'll respond back, and if I have your email and the ability to respond back to you, we'll do so. Hopefully this was productive for you guys. Hopefully you walked away with something new. Cody.
All right, Chris. So we did get a whole lot of questions we won't be able to touch on. We will be sending the list over to you so that you can contact everyone back for all those we don't get to. A couple of questions I do want to touch on. I'll go ahead and place this up on the screen. But Mike A says, there's a general concern that if your approach to security is in tooling and libraries, you may be introducing newer attack vectors. Yet it's not advertised or advised to redesign the wheel. How do you fix this dilemma?
So if your approach to security is tooling and libraries, you're going to fail because there's a lot more to this, to security than tooling and libraries. A lot of it, honestly, is education because they're not teaching secure coding in colleges. And when it comes to making sure that you have the right tools, again, having the right tools properly configured is just the beginning. Having that communication with developers and that communication between the two teams is absolutely critical for success. And again, developer education. One of the things that I did was I actually had contests on basically every 6 months where I would put up something like a PlayStation and I would tell the guys, look, you're going to go through the training, and I put it in a form that you could, take, and you get points for how well you did, how quickly you answered, how, were you right or wrong. And then the guys that were in the top contention then had a head off that we did stuff. And we had 700 plus developers across the company. And even when new people started, we gave them training day one. Hey, welcome to the company. Hey, you're now on this team. Hey, great. Guess what? This is the first week. As you're getting acclimated, I have stuff that I want you to go through. This is what SQL injection looks like. This is what cross-site. I know I only say those two, and there's hundreds, but education is absolutely critical for success. And that's why I said with APIs, tools are great. Tools will tell you where problems are, but they don't stop it or fix it for you. SaaS will tell you where the problems are. You got to understand how to fix them.
All right, Chris, thank you. I think we can squeeze one more quick question in since you did mention tools a couple times. What are some open source tools that you recommend to check for API endpoint vulnerabilities?
Honestly, there's a lot of great vendors out there that have API endpoints tools. A A lot of your DAS tools will actually include API validation because they're testing the things anyway. And so they'll be able to identify, with the DAS tool, hey, I'm hitting this page and I found SQL injection. Well, you're not going to have SQL unless you're running an old ASP page or some basic stuff. You're going to be having it on the back end, and so that will help you identify. For good API tools, I don't really want to name names. There's some really good ones out there, but let me leave you with this. If you validate every request that comes in, making sure that the data is correct, and if the data is wrong, if you have a page that can only take 15 characters for a value, and you exceed that length, somebody's tampered with the page. And being able to identify if you have a tampered page, you throw it all away. You don't try to fix it. You don't try to truncate it at 15. If something's out of the size limits of what it's supposed to be, it means somebody's doing something that's not right. Logging every request that comes in, what request and from who. If you have a multi-tenant system that says, hey, look, I'm logged in from Georgia and I have somebody that just logged in from California in 30 minutes, you can't travel from point A to point B in 30 minutes. Logging that information in your API received requests, those endpoints, again, will show you that something's being abused. Making sure if you have a multi-tenant system, you're validating rules. Making sure that if you have access to this data but don't have access to this other data, make sure that in your regression testing and even in your code-based testing, right, where you can put in right in the source code, make sure that you're validating, hey, I can't see what I'm not supposed to be able to see. And you may even go as far as saying, I'm going to put this down in the SQL Server and within a stored proc, the validation, only because what if I have SQL Server injection, right? If I can inject and bypass the procs and get to the, or execute the procs manually, having that information is going to, that validation step is going to be great. So anyway, some of the information.
Yeah, I know you could keep going on, but I know you have more folk to educate today. So Chris, I really appreciate you joining us here on Techstrong Learning today. It's been such a pleasure.
It has, Cody. And thank you all to that joined live and those who are going to listen to this later. I appreciate it.
So for the rest of our audience, before I dismiss you, just a couple of closing notes. Be sure to jump over to that handout section and grab those resources while you're here. We've also been recording our session today, so we will be sending you the recording as soon as it becomes available here shortly. You'll also find it on the DevOps website. Just visit devops.com/webinars. One more reminder, I'll be reaching out to 2 of our most engaged attendees today to give you a $50 Amazon gift card. So thank you for your chats and your questions. There is the webinar survey, both in the handouts as well as pinned to the top of the chat. So we'd love to hear your feedback there. I'd like to thank Min for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone here, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you spending it here with us at Techstrong Learning, and we hope to see you at a future learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you, guys.